we definitely have to imagine a world without fossil fuels.
It is an opportunity for companies to create value.
In reality, we can actually make money making these changes.
This is a tremendous opportunity to reinvent our lives.
A group of global leaders from business and society are in the Arctic to witness the dramatic effects of climate change firsthand. Each individual will give an insider's view on immediate and realistic solutions for tackling climate change.
I believe education can resolve the fundamental issue of the climate change.
This is a global problem, and it needs a global solution.
The group has traveled to Ilulissat Ice Fjord in West Greenland, a 50-kilometer-long fjord filled in with icebergs of all shapes and sizes. Size and scale are difficult to judge in this barren landscape. The ice in the fjord remains trapped by gigantic icebergs at the outer edge. Once in a while, one of these ice monsters, with an ice face of up to 150 meters, surrenders to the millions of tons of pressure from the 50 kilometers of ice flow behind it, and then the journey towards melting in the open sea begins. The Ilulissat ice stream is one of the fastest flowing glaciers in the world, moving at around 6.5 kilometers per year. The calving front was stable from 1950 to 2001, and then the ice front started to retreat by about 1.5 kilometers a year. Since then, with the local sea ice also gone, the discharge of the ice sheet has accelerated, doubling its speed to about 13 kilometers per year. This means the loss of ice in the last 5 years is equivalent to the previous 100 years. Evidence now shows that almost all of the large glaciers in Greenland are going through the same process.
I have come to the Arctic because the Arctic is the bellwether with respect to climate change. What we see here, the impact of our development style, our consumption patterns, are only the beginning of more transformational changes that will dramatically affect the future of humankind.
I'm here in the Arctic to study and to see and to feel these spectacular natures and to discover the effects of global warming.
I'm a politician. I make rules to try to prevent climate change. So I need to go and see what's happening. I need to go see the actual consequences of what would happen if we don't do anything, if we don't do more to prevent global heating.
I wanted to see it, I wanted to understand it, and to leave inspired to go out and really work on the issue and to make a difference in the world.
Each individual in the group will come face to face with the rapid environmental changes that are happening in the Arctic. They will be shown the latest research by leading climate scientists and come to understand the planetary scale of what is happening.
Being here and observing these glaciers that are coming out and into the sea is a combination of emotions and of thoughts. On the one hand, of course, the beauty of nature, but on the other hand, realizing that what we're doing around the world has a profound impact in the Arctic and in other parts of the world.
It's spectacular, really impressive. And of course it makes you think about how to preserve this nature for the next generations. And so of course we are thinking about the climate change and global warming and protecting the nature.
Each individual is a highly successful professional, working in energy, food, finance, technology, health, and human population. These are all people who have the vision and ability to suggest a range of solutions for tackling climate change.
People always say that climate change is going to be expensive for us, but in reality, we might make money on doing the transformations that we need to do, because we will focus on innovation, we will focus on more energy-efficient solutions, and we will create new jobs. So in fact, we should turn the argument around and say, how can we make money doing this?
The important thing is that we are all part of the solution. The developed world needs to get in this with resources and technology transfer. The developing world needs to get in this because it makes no sense for them to reproduce the mistakes that the developed world made in the past.
From the beginning of time, the climate on Earth has changed from warm periods to cold periods, and life has always been able to adapt and evolve. But now the pace of change has altered dramatically. We have scientific evidence of the path that the climate has followed for the last 800,000 years. What we can see is that temperature and greenhouse gas concentrations track each other very closely. Now, human activities are accelerating the dynamics of the planet. By burning fossil fuels, we are adding to the natural emissions of greenhouse gases, with the result that the concentration of gases is well above any previous level in the 800,000-year record, and temperatures are also now increasing.
Over the past 10,000 years, we've had less than 1 degree of temperature change all over the planet, a very stable period. This is the period where humanity has developed as we know it today. What we are all today is a product of that 10,000 years. And yet, we had 2 periods of relative warming. It brought to England the wine industry. So there's some positives if that warming were to stay at that level and not exceed it. But we also had a little ice age. Only a few hundred years later, all within this little narrow band of less than 1 degree of variability. So in the end, climate change can be really described by a simple phrase: 1 degree matters.
In 2007, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published its scientific report, showing that the global average temperature had increased over the past century by 0.74 degrees centigrade. In the Arctic, the average temperature has increased by 1 to 2 degrees centigrade over the past 40 years, causing glaciers to melt more rapidly than expected and accelerating sea level rise. And over land, the temperature has increased by up to 5 degrees over the past century. The volume of sea ice in the Arctic is decreasing, and there is now a strong chance that the North Pole will be ice-free in the summer in the next 1 to 3 decades. The warming of the oceans is also adding to the rise of sea level, because seawater expands as it heats up. We can even see evidence of ocean acidification, which is making it more difficult for the small organisms at the bottom of the food chain to grow properly. Some parts of the world are now experiencing more intense weather events. Alarm bells are ringing out all over the planet. It is very likely that between 0.5 and 1 degree of further warming is already in the pipeline, due to the massive amount of greenhouse gases we've already pumped into the atmosphere. So even if we could stop human-related emissions, we are on our way to a 2-degree world.
We can see what 1 degree centigrade rise in global temperatures really means. The melting of the glaciers, the warming of the oceans, changes in weather patterns. We can anticipate what a 2-degree increase in temperature would bring. Changes in the way that plants grow and where we find animals, the way that ecosystems pull together. But what would a world with 3 degrees temperature rise look like? We would have changes in floods and storms and droughts, and it would begin to impact on the very way that we live. And by the time we get to a 4 degrees centigrade rise, then the very fabric of life begins to melt away. And it is not certain that humans can survive in all the places where they live today, let alone in the numbers that we anticipate being on the planet in the next 20 to 30 years.
Instead of thinking of climate change as a gradual change, I like to describe it as though there's a meteor heading towards the Earth and it's going to hit in 50 years. If that were true, we would all wake up every morning and we'd look through our telescopes and we'd try to find the meteor and we'd try to understand where it was going to hit. We'd make that meteor part of our everyday life. We'd change our living patterns, we'd come up with innovative solutions to the problem, and we have to find a way to make climate change feel as real as that.
The explosion of modern life has been built around seemingly unlimited sources of coal, oil, and gas. But it has been the burning of these fossil fuels to drive our economies that has led to the greenhouse gas emissions that are now causing global warming. Production and consumption of energy accounts for 70% of human-caused carbon dioxide emissions. And half of these emissions are generated by China, the USA, and the European Union. Energy demand in emerging economies, which includes South Korea, India, Brazil, Indonesia, as well as China, is expected to grow rapidly, with estimates that they might double their energy use in the coming few decades.
We have to imagine a world without fossil fuels. The reserves we have of coal and of oil and of gas are finite. They're going to run out eventually. And of course they're also the source of the problem in climate change. That's where the carbon dioxide is coming from. The question is, can we make the transition from those sources of energy to alternative sources of energy quickly enough? It has to be really quite a rapid change.
If we choose to continue to burn fossil fuels until they are all used up, we will simply increase the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and experience even more global warming. On the other hand, we can choose to move now to a world where energy efficiency and renewable sources of energy are used, and so avoid many of the problems of a warmer world.
We definitely have to imagine a world without fossil fuels, because this imagination brings out creativity, new products and new business opportunities.
But perhaps the most renewable of the energies, and the one that we should be moving forward with first, because it is low-hanging fruit, is energy savings, demand-side management. And there's just a tremendous amount that we can do, both in the developed and the developing world. Estimates say that we could be saving, with today's technologies, already 30% of our energy usage. And that would go a long way towards lowering 1 degree, because that's what we have to start doing today.
Currently, we waste a great deal of our produced energy both in business and at home. According to the 2009 McKinsey report, by 2020, it will be economically feasible to make energy savings in the USA that can reduce energy-related greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 25%. And for every $1 spent on energy-saving measures, $2 will be saved in the cost of producing that energy. Many communities in America have local bans on drying clothes outside, so people have to use electric dryers. The amount of energy used by these dryers has been estimated to be equivalent to 15 nuclear power stations per year. Even changing to a more efficient household appliance can have an effect, because every small action that reduces energy demand can add up to significant energy savings when undertaken by millions of people. But this is just one part of the puzzle. We still need to increase our use of renewable energy and decrease our fossil fuel dependency.
How long will it take? Well, I believe that already in the next 5 to 10 years, we will see hundreds, maybe thousands of products for energy efficiency and renewable energies that will drive us in a low-carbon economy.
Today, we already have the technologies and products that can provide sustainable and renewable energy. In Denmark, the region of Thisted, consisting of 20,000 households and 1,700 private companies, has for the last 30 years used and invested extensively in a mix of renewable technologies. Thisted is now 100% self-sufficient in its electricity demand and almost 85% self-sufficient in its heating needs.
What's happening in this commune in Thisted, this should be the model, and we should be moving this to every community, every region of the world. It doesn't have to rely on Russian gas, doesn't have to rely on Middle East oil. It's all local. So it's what we call a third industrial revolution. That's what they've done in Thisted.
80% of Thisted's electricity comes from wind, and the rest from other renewable energy sources, such as biogas and power plants which run on industrial and household waste. The waste incineration also supplies 70% of the region's heating requirements. So waste that would normally go into landfill sites is actually being reused to supply the energy needs of the communities. The rest of the renewable heating production is made up of a combination of hay incineration, a farming waste product, and geothermal energy.
Just because we have spent 150 years emitting fossil fuels doesn't mean we have to do it in the future. We could reinvent an economy with sustainable buildings, with low environmental impact materials, buildings that are their own power plants. We could build solar and wind and heat pumps into the basic structure of our cities, towns, and homes. And that's a much more attractive future. It puts the money into jobs that are local, it puts green and innovation at the front, and it biases against us poisoning ourselves.
The inhabitants of Thisted haven't had a rise in their heating bill for the last 30 years, and it is 1/3 of the price it would be if oil was used. It is also clear that producing energy from renewables creates jobs and income within the local economy.
So what Thisted and other communities are saying is, why not just use what we got? So we are producing our own power. It's called power to the people.
Today's economy is based on a model where the growing population of the world always needs to consume more. By 2030, it has been estimated that our consumption of resources will have increased by 50%. But with climate change, the natural resources needed will be under enormous pressure. With a 2-degree rise in temperature, we will begin to see coral reefs die back. Animals and plants come under increasing pressure to migrate and adapt, or face the risk of extinction. Livestock and crops start to be negatively affected as areas experience more frequent droughts and floods, and ecosystems begin to fail. Soon, the vital infrastructure of society becomes less secure.
There has to be another model for economic growth than one that is based solely on consumption. And indeed, it may well be that we have to reconsider the whole question of whether growth is the fundamental driver. I think we are going to have to rethink the way in which we operate the tax system. I don't think it's a question of shifting completely from one model to another, but I think we are going to have to add to our existing method of taxation some way of making those who are producing carbon emissions pay for it, which will mean a form of carbon tax applied to energy producers and others who are creating emissions.
Taxation is probably a very large part of the solution, because what we need to do is put tax that is a price on consuming things that will cause a lot of carbon emissions. On the other hand, we also live in a world where the things that we tax now might not be a very good idea taxing. That's labor, things like that. So if we instead create an economy where we tax driving in your car, we tax using electricity, stuff like that, then we might be able to get a more sustainable and really also more morally defendable economy.
Taxes are a part of the problem and a part of the solution. We need to stop taxing work and capital and start taxing the use of our natural resources. The way we get that straight, we will be sending markets the correct signals with respect to transitioning in the direction we want to move.
Today, gross domestic product, or GDP, is the parameter used by governments to measure our economic wealth. It tells us about how much we are producing, consuming, importing and exporting. But it does not tell us about the costs of keeping the environment clean, of tackling climate change, or even the quality of people's lives.
Because human behavior needs to change, we need again to look at how to measure things. And if we start looking at how to measure things, we realize that the current belief in growth at all costs, which has been described incidentally as a form of cancer of the system, when you look at the question of costs and how we assess them, we realize we've got a great many things completely wrong. What is quite interesting is the Chinese invented what they call clean green growth, in which you do measure externalities, that is to say the factors beyond simply producing more things, which is the great bane of gross national product, gross domestic product and the rest, but instead try to see the true costs for society and indeed for the planet as a whole and for other living creatures. We are an animal species and we have completely outstripped the resources which should underlie the behavior of this animal species.
One of the most important and vulnerable resources on the planet are our forests. They are the lungs of the world, absorbing greenhouse gases and regulating the climate. Deforestation and forest degradation through agriculture, infrastructure development, destructive logging and fires account for nearly 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So deforestation causes more greenhouse gas emissions than the entire global transport sector of cars, trucks, aeroplanes, trains and shipping. Tropical forests are disappearing at the rate of about 130,000 square kilometers per year, equivalent to the size of Greece. Since the beginning of the last century, 50% of the world's tropical forests have been lost. Currently, one day's deforestation is equivalent to the carbon footprint of 30 million passengers flying from Europe to New York every single day.
Stopping deforestation is a very important part of the puzzle we need to put together. And the only way we're going to do that is by putting together programs and policies where the value of a tree standing will become greater than the value of a tree cut. Back in 1995, in Costa Rica, we passed through our legislation a first carbon emission tax. And I say first because it was probably one of the first countries in the world that did this. The resources went into an environmental services fund that purchased environmental services from farmers around the country. So planting trees and leaving trees standing up was one of the environmental services that we were paying for.
The quickest solution to deforestation would be to simply stop cutting down trees. However, according to the World Bank, forest products represent a $270 billion industry. So a complete stop to deforestation is unlikely to happen. A more realistic solution is to carefully manage forest resources by eliminating clear cutting. Instead, enough young trees should be planted to replace the harvested and older trees. Sweden is the world leader within forest biotechnology and has regulated its industry to be sustainable. Swedish forests are increasing every year through replanting of new trees, binding nearly 140 million metric tons of carbon dioxide a year in trunks, roots, branches, needles and leaves. This is twice as much as the country emits. The net reduction of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as a result of Swedish forestry is 60 million metric tons a year. A 3-degree world brings with it extreme flooding events. More intense storms, changes to the pattern of monsoons, and longer periods of drought. Sea level rise and storm surges mean that low-lying areas around the world are regularly flooded, unless extensive coastal defenses have been built. In the Arctic, the sea ice has virtually gone, and methane, a greenhouse gas 20 times more powerful than carbon dioxide, is being lost at an accelerating rate from the melting permafrost in the Arctic. The process quickly becomes self-reinforcing, leading to an inevitable further temperature rise. Tropical glaciers with billions of people dependent on them for water have almost disappeared, and there is an irreversible melting of large sections of the Greenland ice sheet. Andreas Alstrom, a Danish glaciologist, is on a mission. He is monitoring the melting and annual mass loss of the Greenland ice sheet using data from a new network of automatic monitoring stations. Andreas is maintaining the instruments which can tell him exactly how much ice is lost from the ice sheet each year. The little village of Isotok provides a jumping-off point for the expedition. the best and safest way to get up onto the ice sheet is to use the local Inuit and their traditional transport, dog sleds. After a half day of traveling, they arrive at the first station. It has taken a beating from the winter storms and is buried under the wind-packed snow.
It's kind of in a sorry state. This is a product of the weather that we get in this part of the world. We've been digging for 3 hours now, and we've reached the glacier surface. So the dark thing you see here is actually ice. This is the glacier. This is the inland ice. So this is what we're looking to reach. It's a tough station. Whew. Only one instrument damaged. It's good stuff. Within glaciology, we see that not only are all the local glaciers shrinking all over the world, we also see changes in the larger ice caps, like the Greenland ice sheet. And the mass loss from the ice sheet is much larger than we expected. So the smaller glaciers and ice caps are reacting quickly to climate change, so they're already melting at a fast rate. It was previously believed that the Greenland ice sheet would react much slower to climate change because of its size. But now we see that it's reacting dramatically on a year-to-year basis. So that really changes the picture.
The climate change models used by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change do not include the impact of the melting of the polar ice caps and glaciers worldwide. The main problem is that because these are on land, they add to the volume of the oceans when they melt and lead to even more sea level rise. By including this melting, the latest estimates are much higher than the 2007 agreed numbers of between 20 to 58 centimeter sea level rise by the end of the century.
We've not been able to assess the input of these glaciers as well as we need to do. And they are really moving rapidly, and particularly here in Greenland. And what we really see now, that rather than something like maybe a foot or two or half a meter, we're more likely to get like a meter or a meter and a half during this century. Now, some people will say that's not very much, but if you live in Bangladesh, it's very serious. You live in southern Florida, very serious.
We know it's large enough, though, to have extremely serious implications for many coastal projects, for coastal infrastructure, for cities and for low-lying areas. So we have to take account of that uncertainty in the way we design for the future, the way we design our new roads, our new buildings, our new ports, our new harbours. They have to be designed with flexibility in mind to adapt to those uncertain trends in the longer term.
Today, 80% of the world's population lives in the coastal plain, and many of the world's biggest cities will be affected by rising sea levels. Shanghai is a city of 20 million people built on the Yangtze River Delta, only 3 meters above sea level. It is the largest container port in the world. To protect the billions of dollars of economic investment in international shipping activities from the rising river and sea level, Shanghai's engineers are reinforcing the floodgates and levees at vast cost. In the Netherlands, there has been a long history of protecting the population from the sea with levees and dikes. But now, with about half of the land lying below sea level, and with a projected sea level rise of between 65 and 130 centimeters by the end of the century, people are starting to look at more innovative solutions.
The idea behind the designs is that we adapt to the climate change. The adaptation goes from the whole building process, so we try to build as green as possible, but we also look that the climate change doesn't have any effect on it. It's a new way of creating a city. It's a dynamic city, it's not a static city. We have to have more space for the water, but you have to have more space to live on as well, so why not combine it?
Entrepreneurs will come automatically in the solution space of climate change, as this will be one of the biggest business opportunities of the future.
Changing our values will require a complete rewiring, a complete reset with respect to our software. And what I mean by that is that we're going to need, on the one side, governments that are proactive in putting together proper regulatory frameworks that make a good, viable business opportunity of transferring into a low-carbon economy. On the other side, we're going to need the creativity, the entrepreneurship, the leadership, and the resources of business that see this as the way going forward. And we're going to need a consumer that is more educated, more sophisticated, and understands that this is the future.
I think big companies can contribute to a low-carbon world, not only in reducing their own emissions while producing, but also in finding technological solutions to the problem. There's one project we, as the family of the founder of Siemens, are very much interested in, which is Desert Tech. It is a project to create a huge solar power plant in the desert, which is going to answer to our energy demand in a very, very sustainable way. What I really like about this project is that it is about joint forces. It's not only about societies and one company joining forces, it's about joining forces of several companies from several industries.
The Desertec project is based on a collaboration of 12 companies specializing in renewable energy technologies, energy utility and financing. It aims to add solar power to the renewable energy infrastructures of Europe, Northern Africa and the Middle East through cross-border partnerships. It is an energy project that is ambitious and sustainable, and on a scale never seen before. It will provide the capacity of 100 large power plants, equivalent to the total energy production of the United Kingdom and Ireland combined. The idea behind the project is to complement existing renewable energy sources by constructing solar power plants located all the way from Morocco to Saudi Arabia. They will be connected to other solar power plants in Europe, to wind farms along the coastlines of North Africa and Europe, hydroelectric and geothermal power plants, and biomass energy production.
I think the most interesting thing about climate change and the voyage that I've taken over the last 3 years is that this is not a problem we need to have. We can solve this problem. The solutions are technologies that we understand. It's just a choice to, not even to live differently in the sense of living worse. It's just a choice to live differently in the sense, in many ways, of living better. Solutions like, for example, electric cars are silent. They don't make noise. They accelerate more quickly. Solutions like renewable energy is a much more efficient way to run the planet. And so the striking thing to me about the work of the last few years is that we've come to understand that we can solve the problem, and actually in solving the problem we probably help our economy, and it doesn't cost us a lot of money. And so the idea here that climate change is either something that's too difficult for us to do, or it's going to ruin our standard of living, or ruin our economies, or ruin our future, is entirely false. And of course, the people who usually say that don't understand that not doing anything about it is what will ruin our lives and ruin our economies.
With 4 degrees of warming, the ice sheets of Antarctica become unstable. Many species will have become extinct. Sea levels will keep rising. Ocean warming and acidification will bring the death of 80% of the world's coral reefs. Global temperature increases are joined by the mounting threats of population growth, soil loss, and aquifer depletion. new diseases will emerge and there will be widespread destruction of ecosystems. Agriculture will no longer be reliable, and people will start to move to regions where food is still available. All of these problems are made worse by an ever-growing human population. It is estimated that by 2030 there will be 8 billion people on Earth, rising to 9 billion by 2050.
Education can definitely help solve the overpopulation problem and the link to climate change. We have studies that have shown that if you increase the education for general populations, but particularly for young girls and for women, that you can reduce birth rates and increase livelihoods and education levels as well as income levels. And so if we do that and we reduce the rate of overpopulation, then we can probably make a link toward using less resources and helping improve the climate change situation.
I truly believe education can resolve the fundamental issue of climate change. We need to teach children from very early stage, make them understand that they should appreciate the nature, they should appreciate every single thing they own. For example, the water they use, the foods they eat. They can understand the source of every element in their life.
The explosion in the world's population, combined with the effects of climate change, mean that we will have to radically rethink the way in which we feed ourselves. According to a recent United Nations report, 1 billion people are currently starving. So even today, we are failing to meet the world's food demands.
The challenge is going to be how to ensure that people, primarily small farmers in the developing world, will have the ability to fend off the impacts of climate change that will affect their yields. There will be diseases that will be newly arrived because of the change in temperature. The availability of water will adversely affect how and when they grow crops. And I think what will ultimately happen is many people may have to abandon their land and look for new opportunities to feed their families and essentially survive. Farmers aren't going to be able to solve this problem on their own. They're going to need the concerted effort and the coordinated effort of all the players involved. That includes the buyers, that includes the politicians, that includes the financial institutions that can provide loans for small farmers, and it also provides the technical agents that can work with them to adapt to the changing conditions.
With global temperatures rising, food production will be put under greater and greater pressure. So in order to continue feeding ourselves, we will need to develop new agricultural production techniques.
I think agriculture has to do two things. It has to grow enough food for us to survive, and it has to we have to build our way out of a high carbon agriculture. And industrial farming is particularly reliant on using lots of carbon, lots of oil to produce food. So we end up with a situation where we have high use of oil, loss of topsoil, and monocultures that are actually dislocating supply lines from consumers.
The World Bank, together with the United Nations, has called for a paradigm shift in agriculture towards more sustainable and ecologically friendly practices. This change will benefit all the world's farmers, but be of particular importance to the 900 million small farmers around the world.
I think there is another way of growing food, and that is through natural farming. These are regenerative systems, and they build carbon back into the soil as well as producing food. This is different from industrial agriculture. And the regenerative agricultural systems are based on natural growing principles, so they're diverse, they're stable, and they're resilient to shock.
In Tuscany, in Italy, 3 brothers are running a sustainable farming business.
My family started organic farming 30 years ago, and it was an adventure, something pioneeristic, because they even didn't know the word organic. And today we employ 130 people, and this is a great satisfaction for us.
The motivation to produce sustainable is just one. I have 3 children, my brother has 3 children, the other brother has 2 children. So they need the future, we need the future, so we have to produce sustainable.
Harvesting is spread out over the year because of the high variety of crops and livestock. The farm produces more than 60 products and employs 130 full-time workers. They can afford to do this because they have no additional costs for fertilizers and pesticides.
With the biodynamic agriculture, you add something to the soil. You increase the organic substance of the soil, and as a consequence, you increase the healthy of the products and their quality.
Sustainable farming means also energy, and the energy here is done with solar panel, and this is the closing circle of sustainability in the farm.
The electricity that the farm does not use is sold to the grid, generating even more profits. The farm has its own processing plant that allows it to make a range of ecological products which are sold directly to consumers.
The last step is packaging and transport. For the packaging, we use recycled cardboard, and for the transport, we use a transportation system that is Go Green certified, CO2 neutral.
The farm is sustainable, profitable, and it absorbs more carbon dioxide than it produces, 3,900 tons per year.
Organic farming is a sustainable model, is also a business model, profitable, replicable. I wish it should be replicated in other places because you have the satisfaction of making quality products with the sustainable farming, reducing CO2 emissions. And we should help a cultural change of the people in order to increase organic farming everywhere.
With 5 degrees of global warming, the planet will develop into one that is unrecognizable from Earth today. The ice sheets are gone from both poles. Rainforests have largely burnt up and disappeared. Coastal cities have become inundated and uninhabitable. Inland temperatures have risen by 10 degrees or more. Mega droughts are occurring across the planet. And human populations, squeezed between areas of extreme drought and flood, are forced to migrate.
What do we need? We need solutions, we need innovation, we need new technology, ways of working, and these are all there. The most important thing, though, is that everybody is working together towards one set of solutions, that we collaborate together, because as we now see, even 1 degree matters.
Being here in the Arctic makes me feel small. It humbles me. Human beings, we all have this tendency of believing we are above it all. And here one understands and connects to Earth in a sense where we really appreciate we are a small part of a much greater system.
I'm overwhelmed by the spectacular nature. And I'm much more sensitive now to all the issues regarding global warming.
I don't think it's changed my views about climate change, but it does reinforce my belief that it's time to do something. If we don't do it now, it will be too late.
I know that I am running out of time. So this really makes a difference, an emotional difference about climate change.
The world is changing, and the reason it's changing is because of the way we're living. So we need to change the way we're living, and I, as a politician, need to make better regulation, and I need to find the money to do the adaptations that we need to do.
Being here in Greenland has definitely deepened and enhanced my knowledge that there is a climate change problem, and it compels me to want to do more in terms of solving the problem.
This has been, I think, a life-changing event. I understand how the global climate patterns affect the entire world. And so what happens here in Greenland affects many places around the world. So I have a greater appreciation of how one person's impact will affect another.
Being in the Arctic also inspires me to carry the fight forward. 1 degree matters. We need to act today.